So what we might do, with your permission, Sally, is we might actually just get into introducing what we're doing this evening. So thank you so much to so many of you that have registered for our webinar this evening. I just thought I'd just do a tiny little bit of an introduction around the framework of what we're going to do this evening, and just a few things that we would like to engage with you. Again, as most of you would be aware, if you've ever attended any of Sally and my or any of our webinars before, we love your engagement. So you seem to be incredibly comfortable with the chat box. If at any point you do have questions, or if you would like to ask anything to myself or to Sally, please pop it there. The more engaging you are, or the more questions you come up for us, it's really, really important. So this session is also about you as educators and for us to be able to share our knowledge. So this webinar this evening was really looking at best practice in teaching emotional literacy, self-awareness and self-management for primary schools. And I think we just want to be really, really clear that our focus this evening is on primary schools. How this does support the teachers and professional learning and the broader school community, contributing to a whole school wellbeing. And one of the key areas that we've been focusing on very, very strongly and spending a lot of time in the last few years is how do we start measuring wellbeing effectively and efficiently and accurately, and as well as making sure that we have those links back to curriculum and making sure that it's evidence-based. So it's with a great privilege that I introduce Sally. Sally Boardman is an amazing presenter who I absolutely love working with. And I think maybe I'll just let you introduce yourself for a moment, Sally.
Thank you, Nikki. Well, I love working with you too. And probably we love working together because we share this passion of getting the message of just how important it is to teach our children emotional intelligence and well-being, because we know how it relates to all aspects of their life. So I started my career as a psychologist. I've studied various modalities in terms of how we think and function. And most recently, I trained with a neuroscientist, Dr. Joe Dispenza. And so before COVID, I was either teaching professional developments in wellbeing and brain health to teachers in schools, or somewhere exotic in the world, teaching week-long neuroscience transformation weeks with Dr. Joe.
Thank you so much, Sally. And so again, I think, if any point, any questions come up, Sally and I do a lot of professional learning for schools. There's a lot of extra work that we can do, and we won't go there just now. But just thought we'd start off just giving a little bit of context around the work that Life Skills Group has done. So we've been around for a really, really long time and working in partnership with schools for over a 12-year period. So for those of you that aren't aware of the programs that we run, we started our first iteration in delivering programs into schools by specialist teachers, teaching social emotional learning through non-competitive sports infused with values. And at that time, it was also approved for professional learning, so that we were not only providing the skills to the students, but also being able to educate and empower the teachers to bring those skills back into the classroom. Throughout that period of time, a lot of things happened, and through the volume of schools that we were working with and in partnership hand in hand, we realized that we wanted to be able to not only share, but also refine how we were offering these skills. And a lot of tools. So we've had a lot of experience, not only in working in wellbeing and social emotional wellbeing, but also in teachers' wellbeing. And we won't go too deeply into that. We're really, really proud of the impact that we've had so far. I'm working with over 850 schools, which is an amazing amount of educators and principals that really prioritise not only their students, but also their well-being. We've been able to study case studies throughout that period to be able to look at how we can begin to work better and refine and define what we're doing. So one of the things when we were popping up, how do we measure well-being? One of the areas is we've been running, we have an area called the Weather Report Unit, and with the Weather Report data was one of the first points that we've started bringing into schools. And what we began to realise is it's not just about collecting information. So there's one thing about clicking on a smiley face or having students register how their smiling face is. But there was an issue that we'd hear constantly around, how do our students, how are they accurately able to identify, understand, express, and manage their emotions? Sally, did you want to talk to that point a little bit? Because I know that you were quite strong in being part of how we built out the next section of what we're doing and why that was so critical to not just have the data, but to really begin to dig under that hood.
Yes, absolutely. So, when we're working with the science, we always want to be collecting the data, don't we? And the feedback that we were getting as well was that, we wanted to make a real impact. And there's a lot of platforms out there that teach emotional intelligence, and they do a brilliant job at what they do. But we really got into the nitty-gritty of how do we know we're accurate? When we're asking a child, are you happy? Are you sad? Are you angry? How do we know that they know what that means? And therefore, how do we work with that? How do we know, for example, that a child isn't clicking on an angry face because it's funny to them, instead of really understanding what's underneath it? So we thought it was so important to really figure out the way to teach the children to identify their emotions, so that we know that we're collecting the right thing and we can start to help them to manage them. So it was the beginning of our identification of emotional awareness.
Absolutely, thank you. And I think that led us into the questions that we thought that we'd unpack tonight, pretty, around what are emotions? And if we are teaching emotional identification and emotional management, where do we start? And Sally and I were, one of the beautiful things about particularly emerging science, or particularly about being in the last 10 years, is we have so much research now. But one of the things is it's forever changing, and we're constantly finding out new things. One of the reasons I chose Levinson's definition of emotions for this evening, to me, was it really breaks down that work and that identification around what is an emotion. So I love his definition of this. Emotions are biologically based reactions that organize an individual's response to important events. And I think, a couple of words that stand out there are biologically, so that ability to really begin to notice within our own body. Individual, so an individual's response. So the way that I might respond to something might be very, very different to how Sally responds to something. So again, it's that subjective experience. And then when we begin to understand that, it starts to lead into a deeper understanding of where we can start to teach emotions and emotional regulation with our students. Did you want to say anything to that point, Sally?
Well, just to re-emphasize this biological root. So emotions, when we get down to it, they're chemicals racing through the body. We could get complex and say that they're neuropeptides, but they're chemicals, and the chemical component of them is the same as when we ingest any chemical. So it's just an interesting way to look at it, to begin to understand that once we understand what they are, we can do something about them, and that they have a lifespan. When they're on, there's a period of time that it takes them to go through the body, and then they're off. So that's a sort of important point to start with.
And what is that? I mean, I know this, but I love asking you this question. What is that lifespan of an emotion?
So if we measure the time from you being triggered, so a thought, which starts off, we have thoughts within the brain, and then we trigger off neurotransmitters, which are the chemicals which transmit information between the neurons within the brain. If enough of these are firing, what happens is the neurotransmitters communicate with the body, because there's always this constant communication between the brain and the body, and the body and the brain. And the neurotransmitters develop into, they activate neuropeptides, which are the chemical messengers which go into the body. And the time it takes for the neuropeptides to go into the body and say we're dealing with anger, the neuropeptide is going to go down to the adrenal glands, and it's going to signal hormones to be produced. And we all know what happens when we have adrenaline and cortisone racing through our veins. There's a lifespan of that, and the lifespan is between 90 seconds and 2 minutes. So that's a fundamental kind of learning point, that when you tell anybody, adults, as well as children, because how many times do we have an emotional reaction to something and hold on to it for days, if not weeks? So there's something else going on there. The actual chemical component, biological component of an emotion is maximum 2 minutes. So this helps teachers and parents, of which I am one. If your child is having a meltdown, 2 minutes is absolutely acceptable biologically. Any moment after that, there's something else going on.
And we'll dig into that a little bit more in a second. So I think, one of the reasons that we talk about, where can we start, and particularly when we're working with young people, starting with recognizing our bodily sensations is a really great place to start. If we're moving really fast, if we're not able to slow down, and if we are not able to begin to recognize what's happening in our bodily sensations, it's really hard to recognize our emotions. And I've just popped up a couple of quotes here that I find that are really important, and they speak to quite a few really pertinent points around teaching our young people around emotions. But emotions involve bodily sensations and the feelings that we notice inside ourselves. Emotions also link our bodies to our thoughts, our memories, and our perceptions. Sally, did you want to add anything there?
The thing that comes up to me here, Nikki, is that emotions, what's the point of them? The point of them is to give us information. They're information. So, gone are the days of emotions get in the way of life. Emotions give us information. So it's about acknowledging them, recognizing them, and knowing what they're telling us that sticks out for me here.
And I love steps there that, more than simply feelings, our emotions have everything to do with who we are, where we are going, and whether we succeed in getting there. And I think you're right. If I look back often when we're presenting or when we're working in this area, I'll often have someone say to me, if I didn't have so many emotions, I'd be able to get more done. And that relationship of really recognizing, befriending our emotions and allowing them to inform us is so critical, not only for us, but also for our children. And we all need that really big toolkit because, here at my age, and I'm sure that you'll relate to this, Sally, but it's not something that we just teach once. When we begin to recognize, it becomes a consistent and constant practice that we need to begin to work. And that's something that we've really identified here at Life Skills Group. This is just a very, very, very brief overview of, we were playing around for many years around how can we begin to not only support, and we were talking about the measurement tool to begin to get data from our weather report unit. The initial reporting, what we found was there was one thing to have an icon and to be able to press it, but then to begin to add in teaching the basic emotions, having a common language and building in the science behind them in a really systematic way was incredibly important, not only for the educators, but also for our students. And I thought tonight, just before we sort of jump into, how can we begin to bring some of this work into our classroom and what are some practical ways that we can begin to do this? Just to Joshua, yes, you will. We are going to be able to send these slides out to you all tomorrow. So, beautiful. Thanks, Anna. I know that you and I both absolutely love the science behind emotions and also neuroscience, but I feel like I would love you to walk us through a little bit. What I might do is just pop us over. If you can explain a little bit, Sally, just giving us a little bit of an idea around what's actually happening in the brain when we are experiencing emotions.
So I guess so as you say, there's so much in the neuroscience of emotions, but the real essence is, and this slide illustrates here, we can see the blue area, the thinking brain. I'm doing this with my cursor, which is probably useless to you. The thinking brain, the blue egg there at the front is the frontal lobe. And then the purple smaller circle is representing the limbic brain. And the important part here is that the limbic brain, often called the emotional brain, its purpose is to keep us safe, to enhance our survival, to help us to survive. And it works on a subconscious level, below the level of thought and awareness, And the neocortex, which is the newest part of the brain, which houses the frontal lobe, is responsible for higher functions such as learning and thinking and rationalizing. And the important part is that they're two separate parts of the brain. And when the limbic brain is activated, this is, you'll have all have heard of the fight, flight, or freeze response. This is where the limbic brain, this resides in the limbic brain. When it's activated by a threat, whether perceived or real, it draws blood flow and energy away from the frontal lobe. Because if you think about it, when you've got to fight for your life, it's not a time to be using those higher executive functions of your brain. So the important thing is that these two parts of the brain aren't on. They're not activated at the same time. So if the limbic brain is on, fight or flight's on, the frontal lobe isn't on. So the frontal lobe, the most recent part of the brain, as I said, is what makes us human. It's what sets us apart from animals that rely on those survival instincts, and it's responsible for those higher level exec functions like being able to plan or organize or self-monitor, initiate, control our responses in order to achieve a goal. So I could go on, and I'm sure in another webinar we'll talk about the 9 functions of the prefrontal cortex and how important they are. But we're not going to delve any deeper into these this evening, but you can see at a glance just how important the functions here are for success in all aspects of life. Their life skills, pun intended. So how important it is to learn how to reconnect this frontal lobe area of the brain when it's off because the limbic brain's on. So I'll leave it there for now, Nikki.
And I think but thank you. I love your I love your passion. I love this awareness. I think one of the really big things for us as an organization is also, our students, our young people love learning about the brain. And there's something that Sally says quite regularly, that when we give them this information, when we're able to help them move from, say, dysregulation, or as Sally would refer to, out of control, to feeling that they can empower themselves to step back into control. It's an incredibly empowering, but also not just giving them agency, but giving them that sense that they can. So we're really, really big on making sure that across the whole school that we are teaching the brain science, that it's taught in a way that we can teach it right from foundational kindergarten right through to year 6, so that they're actually able to understand what's happening inside of them and to be able to have those tools to be able to move between the different parts of their brain. And as we know, what we think, affects our behaviour, and what our behaviour affects how we feel. And in that triangle here, it moves both ways. So that, again, that agency or that ability to understand with those tools, not only will that help them flourish with their social life, with their skills, but also in learning. And we know a lot of research around, if they can't self-regulate, they're not ready to learn. So, oopsie daisy. Just some things that we can do. Actually, you know what we might do before we jump into this? I always think it's lovely when we can talk about, information from us, but I would really love to speak to Lisa Franks from Kurrajong, who I know has been implementing this across the school. And so Lisa, do you mind unmuting yourself? And I'm going to bring you up to the screen because I'd love to ask you some questions. I feel like Sally and I have been chatting, but I'd love to speak to you from a school perspective and to be able to hear what you've been doing. Let's see if I can get you live for a second. Miss Lisa, where are you? There is a lot of people on this webinar. Just bear with me. There you are, allowed to talk. We've got you, Miss Lisa. Just give me a hand. For some reason I've lost my... There we go. No, wrong person. Lisa Franks. Lisa, you should be able to talk now. Let's just see. Lisa Franks.
Okay, that's, yep.
There you are.
Lovely. No, thanks for having me, Nikki. We've just started our journey with life skills at Currajong Public School. And I guess we explored a lot of different programs that we can use, because part of our new 4-year school plan is wellbeing. And that's an area that we've identified and perhaps exacerbated by COVID. But we also needed to work with a program that would enable us to teach our kids the skills to dealing with emotional well-being and, healthy minds, healthy bodies. And we kind of believe that if our kids are healthy and happy, then they're much more willing to learn and be engaged at school.
So, and thank you so much, Lisa. So what were some of the, and you don't have to reveal this, I'm kind of just going off a whole lot of questions that other educators have asked us. For your individual schools, what were some of the key areas or the success metrics that you wanted to be able to dig into that helped you to choose life skills?
Well, as you know, there's lots of different products out there and different tools that you can use. But I think the thing that really drew us to life skills was the ability to use the weather report to actually gain data on our kids. And it is the way the department is going. And, every outcome that we choose to implement as a school or what we put in our school plan has to be measurable. So that was one of the reasons we went. The other reason is that, you guys are so approachable and helpful. No questions too big, no questions too small. I had a quick webinar with someone yesterday, Audra, who was fantastic and helped me with some questions. So I think it's the availability. I love the ideals of your program, but I also love the support that comes with it.
Incredibly beautiful. I'm actually blushing. Thank you, Lisa. And just in terms of, any notable changes in your students since starting the life skills goal, or anything that sort of stands out for you right now?
I guess I'm hearing kids talk about it in the playground when we're on duty at recess and lunch. And the other thing that I really like is that we've had the staff buy-in. And even sitting in the staff room at recess and lunch, you can actually hear people talking about it, and not just talking about, the lessons and things, but discussing with each other. Like, I had a particular child who is in a year 4 class, but has some learning disabilities. The content was a bit tricky. So, together we could work out how do we move him or modify, I guess, the curriculum to suit his needs. So it's very flexible. And I guess I love that individualization that comes with it.
No, thank you. And what advice, you did a lot of research. I know that for you in your school, there was a lot of thought, a lot of process. What advice would you have for anyone starting out their journey or getting started with life skills go? What would you say to them?
I think, I guess there's so much information out there, and I was particularly drawn because I loved your website. It had a lot of resources, and, as teachers, educators, we are busy. We are crazy busy. I love the fact that it also caters for teachers' well-being and health, and that so many of the resources, the lessons, the programs are actually done. So you're taking off that pressure of teachers who are already overloaded, and you're actually helping us, providing us with personal support as well as curriculum support, which is, a huge bonus in my book.
I think one of the things that I'll always remember is giving you the overviews of the scope and sequence and the week-by-week plan, and your face was like, that was a really beautiful moment. Yeah. To your point too, recognizing that, we sit here, Sally and I sit here, and a whole team, like it's not just Sally and I, we have specialists in curriculum writing and program planning, and the list goes on and on and on, as Sally was saying, in terms of neuroscience and psychology. But to be able to offer that and share that and to support the work that you do in your classrooms and to be able to create that learning environment is critical for our young people, but also for you as teachers. And I think that's why we've always been very, very big on teachers' wellbeing right from the start when we first started out. So I just want to say a huge big thank you. I think I blushed about 3 times there.
No, we've just, we've had such a positive experience. And I think I love the fact, I mean, I've always been an oversharer with my kindergarteners, but I was doing a lesson this week and we were talking about being brave and some situations that you're in that you're nervous about. And kids are telling me, and they were talking about going on this treetops course. And then, I was able to share a video when I did some zip lining when I was overseas and I was terrified. And I think it creates a bit more of an emotional bond with your children, being able to share personal insights and letting them know that we're humans too. So, that to me, that's invaluable.
And thank you so much for that. So I think that particularly right at this point, when we look at how can teachers support the teaching of that emotions, above and beyond that, role modeling is so important. It's incredibly important for creating not only that climate in the classroom, but also for beginning to teach this. So it does start with us and that ability for us to first be able to recognize in ourselves and also to be able to model that. So I just want to say a huge big thank you. Also, I might just throw it out there because we can. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, I might regret this. Does anyone have any questions for Lisa? Sorry, Lisa, I didn't even ask.
That's okay.
Anything in the chat box and I can relay it to Lisa. And again, we will be having another educator jump on. So if something does pop up, please feel free to pop them in there. But I think it's really important. One of the big missions that we've got too is creating a community where we're also able to share best practices, to be able to speak about what's working. We have tiny little incy-wincy remote schools that are just so impactful and doing the most incredible work, up to huge big schools in cities and major cities, and being able to share all differences, because we feel privileged enough to be able to be in these schools watching the incredible work that you're doing and share them, but also creating a community. So just on behalf of everyone, Lisa, I just want to say thank you so much for jumping in and sharing that, and also supporting the other educators and, for doing the incredible work that you do every day in the school.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Jill, I will pop back to that question in a moment, if that's okay, because I think that's really a really important question. And if I forget, I'll just get Anna to remind me after. So I think if we have a look at what are some things, from tomorrow, what can we do when we walk back into the classroom? And what can we begin to do and to support the teaching of emotions? So we've just popped up a few points here. Sally, do you want to speak to this a little bit?
Sure. And yes, I do. I was just thinking of Lisa. It warmed my cockles, Lisa, sorry, I'm so English, to hear you say that you recognise the well-being is good for the teachers too, because this is, really important to me, because we know there's a lot of science behind how our children learn from us before we've even opened our mouths, and that's true for emotional intelligence too. So I'm so glad you said that. So yeah, the first point here is so important. All of the skills, so emotional intelligence is a palette of skills, and all of these skills, just like learning to play the football or tennis or piano or violin, need to be practiced. We're not born with them. But the good news is we now know, because of neuroscience, that they can be developed. Resilience can be learned. The way that we reduce our refractory period, or, the time that we react to emotions or triggers, can be reduced. So all of these things can be learned, which I think is so empowering. We're not set in stone. If we're a bit pessimistic, we can learn to be more optimistic. So teaching our students that emotions come and go, as we mentioned before, it's a chemical rush. So often children, and adults too, when we're experiencing a strong emotion, it can be terrifying as an adult. So imagining how that is for a child, it's very overwhelming. And just the very fact, this learning piece, this educational piece about it's a chemical raging through your body, and just like a wave, it will leave, that the clouds, it will pass, is so important. And just that helps them to be able to know that they're going to be able to cope with it. using the language of identifying emotions. If we, and I love that Lisa commented on this too, we have to have a common language. If Lisa didn't know how it felt to be brave and to step beyond herself and onto the zip line, how can she actually feel and be in tune with a child who's telling her she's scared of taking a step beyond where she would usually end? So we have to have this common language, not just with words, but also of understanding, of having embodied and experienced the emotions. And then, just reading this long one, encouraging students to focus their attention on the physical sensations. Because, of course, when the chemicals of emotions are running through our bodies, we feel it within the body, physical sensations. So we need to be able to recognize what that is. Otherwise, it's the scary unknown. And as we know, we've had lots of experiences this year with, the unknown is scary. Our brains are designed to protect us and to be able to predict what's coming next. So to be able to teach students, when you feel that thing in your tummy, that's nervousness. And it's okay, because here's how we can deal with it. And, when we're sad, that we might crouch over and our shoulders droop. And it helps us to not only recognize the emotions within ourselves, so building that self-awareness, but also within others. So it's really important that we're able to identify what another's feeling. As we all know, we've all experienced children who just haven't registered that there's an emotional situation going on and, go straight in there and it's not appropriate. I'll stop there, Nikki.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Sally. And I think that then leads into, particularly how we identify emotions in another person. So I think that it's, one thing, and I love how you talked about being able to recognize the signs and signals, but also being able to label them, to be able to actually begin to build out that repertoire. So rather than, what's angry or one word around angry, what does it look like? When do we feel these emotions? How do we recognize them in someone else? And also helping and supporting our students to understand particular emotions in other people and those nuanced, very small parts as well. One of the things that we know that is incredibly important is also having a whole school language around identifying emotions. So one of the things that we'd highly recommend, this is one that we use, and making sure that there's a common language and that we're all speaking to the same. So at Life Skills Group, we use for our whole school language around identifying emotions. That identifying emotion means being able to recognize sensations and feelings within our body. This can help us to manage our emotions and respond more calmly to our classmates, friends, families, teachers, and friends, teachers, and family members. And having that whole school language and having a really clear description of these is incredibly important for moving forward, that we're also all on the same. So I think there's one thing to be able to recognize, name, identify, but then what do we do? So, there's one thing, and I think you mentioned it earlier, Sally, we need to then be able to regulate it. And what I might do is, I know that we've got Jessica Reeve, who can really speak to her stage 3 students and using this and some of the recognition, but also the self-regulation points here. Because again, there's one thing to recognize it and name it, but then how do we, as we speak to at Life Skills Go, how do we then begin to regulate it and begin to bring ourselves right back into this present moment or to prepare for learning? So Jess, I'm just going to unmute you. Just bear with me. Crazy, just bear with me 1 second. I'm going to unmute you. Jess Reeve, there we are. Okay, Jess.
Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm so well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. So I'd love to hear a little bit, just before we go into this self-regulation part, and I think that, I'd love to hear that, what did it look like in your Year 6 classroom?
I started the weather report unit in my Year 6 classroom, and I think for the first few weeks, I really concentrated on training that habit in my room to the point where if I forgot, my kids were reminding me and wanting to do it. And then after that sort of training, so to speak, I really dived into the weather report unit And that really explicitly taught my kids the skills they needed to not only identify the emotions, but also start thinking about how can I change the way I'm feeling, or how can I react in a really effective manner. So I suppose that's really the big picture for my year 6 kids.
And I think that's a really interesting one, because at the end of the day, it is important that they can recognise them, but being able to have those tools as well to be able to regulate and to begin to prepare for learning. How do you think that affected your teaching and learning in the classroom by implementing those skills?
I mean, I know you were just talking about a common language, and I think when you have that common language, communication barriers fall away, and it allows you to deal with issues as they arise in a quicker manner. It allows you to help students return to a ready to learn state quicker, which allows you to get into learning and ensure that your students are ready to learn. So it's about teaching those strategies and having that common language so that you can attack the issues head on as they arise in your classroom.
And I think that that's a really interesting one. So that's from a classroom perspective, but I also know that, you're a wellbeing coordinator that also, built out your plan. What impact did the weather report unit have school-wide?
Yeah, I suppose instead of being insular in a classroom, that applied to a whole school level. So, being a year 6 teacher, I would go out onto the playground and be dealing with issues that were involving, a stage 1 student or a kindergarten student. And I suppose when a whole school implements this program and a whole school is working on the same outcome, you develop a whole school language. And it means that whatever I'm saying to kindergarten, and yes, my language is slightly different when I'm dealing with a early stage 1 student and a year 6 student. However, words like self-regulation, words like let's think about the stop strategy, words like how can we have empathy, they are explicitly taught across the school, and every child within my school can access that language and knows what I'm saying as a year 6 teacher, no matter the age of the child.
And in terms of having just sort of lifting up a level out of the classroom and sort of looking at a whole school approach, how, in terms of our reporting and visibility across the school and the data that we were collecting, how did you use that?
I suppose it was used in multiple ways. I think that it was very handy across the school for dealing with community and parents, having conversations with community about how our kids were feeling. Our community is very involved in our school, which is fantastic and I love, but it just allows us to have data to back up what's happening in our school. From another prong effect, it really marries into our academic data. So the data we're collecting for English or maths or science, when we can examine both educational data alongside our wellbeing data, we can start to see trends. We can start to identify kids that really they succeed in class, and then when we give them an assessment, they fall short. So we can start to marry the data that says, Sarah is feeling really anxious on the morning of an assessment with her poor result. So, I mean, there are never-ending ways you can use this data, but for me personally, within my school, it was really helpful with dealing with parents and using alongside our academic data to sort of make conclusions about kids' learning and where they're at.
And was there anything that sort of stands out that surprised you that you didn't expect?
I think that there are always those students that suffer in silence. I had a few students that, and I know that I can speak to a lot of teachers and I can say this in a really safe space, that there are 30 children in my class and there are some that fall through the gaps. I am one person, and those kids that suffer in silence, I think the data from this weather report really made me go, hang on a minute, Johnny has clicked, anxious 3 days in a row now. I haven't noticed any behavior. I need to check in with him. So I think it's a tool that you can use in a really busy, demanding profession to ensure the safety of your kids.
I think that, and thank you so much for that vulnerability, because I think that, if we go right back to where we started back in 2018, we were looking at, how do we know, value and care for every student? So that was really a key point for us, that we began to go, well, wait a minute, we do have 30 students in there, and how do we know what's happening for them? And I think, some of our recommended approaches are to be using that weather report at a minimum once a day. And I know that we have a lot of schools that use it regularly throughout the day for students that they're observing, or to be able to jump into. So I just want to say a huge big thank you. And thank you for the work that you do again. And we're going to jump back into self-regulation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. So I'm just going to jump back into our self-regulation, because it is a critical part. So there's one point about identifying emotions, but there is another part to be able to look at self-regulation. It's quite critical. There's a lot of research and there's a lot of data these days looking at, I love this top one, if students don't learn how to work with their emotions, it can impair their lives in ways and reduce their capacity to learn, remember, be creative, function under pressure, and relate to others. So having a look at that, we know that, it's important. We know the research is there, but how do we begin to do that? And for all of us as adults, I'm going to blush saying this again, but in that moment, from trigger to reaction, it can be as simple as Sally mentioning earlier, that 90 seconds. Sally, can you speak to us? Because this is actually scientifically proven. And I love that because often it can be, just pause, or, we'll look at some strategies in that in a second. But I'd love you to speak to the research behind that 90 seconds.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, that they've measured the time that it takes the chemicals to travel through the body, which an emotion is, right? It's this chemical response from the brain to the body. And the actual lasting time of that from thought to emotional reaction is 90 seconds to 2 minutes. So we're all familiar with stimulus response. And as a human, we have this amazing capacity to interject by switching on our frontal lobe and doing something before we react, like an animal. And when, I don't want to go too much into the neuroscience to put people off, but as we looked at the beginning with these separate parts of the brain, the frontal lobe came later. So it's our evolutionary crowning achievement as humans, and it allows us to do something to stop this response. And we all know that animals react very quickly. We don't have to. But when we're stuck in the limbic, in the chemical, in the hormonal, the emotional part of the brain, reacting as animals. So what we can do is learn strategies and tools to do something in this 90 seconds period of time that then allows us to go from stimulus response to stimulus considered, from stimulus reaction to stimulus considered response. And to me, this is one of the most important things to teach our children. It's so simple, but we all know how lashing out, acting before a considered response can change the course of a life. So it's so important, and we're seeing, in the world more and more and more, we're more reactive. There's more going on. We're less considered. We're less slow. Life has sped up. So it's so important to teach children the gift of being able to respond, having considered how they want to respond, because that to me is ultimate self-control. So I'm very passionate about this. It's so simple, and it can make the difference between a child being able to do what they want to do in life and being stopped.
And I think just to your point too, Sally, I think, so what I've done here is I popped in and pretty much kind of brought in some of those things that we can begin to link from identifying emotions. So trigger. What are some of those things, or here are some of those things that we can do so that we can move into that appropriate response? So breathe. Jess mentioned the stop strategy. We use a stop strategy for, we actually use it for when we're teaching teacher wellbeing, but we also use it for the students a lot. And the S stands for literally stop. So when in trigger, stop. For adults, I often say to them, just do not open your mouth. Just hold it. You don't remember anything tonight. Just remember, in that moment of a large emotion, pause, stop, breathe. Sally and I were having a joke about whether it's 3 breaths or 30 breaths or 90 seconds of breath. And I was saying to her, sometimes it's a lot of breaths. But in that breathing, beginning to observe your sensations. So this is linking right back to, okay, what's happening in my body right now with students? And these are really good action points with our young people as well. Get them to stop, quieten down, breathe, observe what's happening. I find working with young people as well, get them to start talking about what they're noticing within their body as well. What sensations are they noticing? As we talked about earlier, it might be butterflies in their tummy, it might be pounding in their chest. Sometimes they'll do this with their head because there's a lot going on. And then as we often refer to, name it to tame it. Let's see if we can label that. Sally, do you want to speak just really briefly, because I know neuroscience has really done a lot of work in that name it to tame it. Do you want to say just very briefly why that's important?
Well, very briefly, name it to tame it is in itself one of the regulation strategies. So the science shows us that if we can simply name the emotion that we're experiencing, the height out of it, it lessens, the chemical reaction lessens. So it works. It's an actual strategy in itself.
And I think it's a really great one to remember when we're in the classroom, name it. Tell me what emotion or tell me what you're feeling right now. Because they're often, they might not be right, but again, they're beginning to learn that. In there, we've just added in again, this isn't step by step. And I think Sally will say that if you could just do one of these, I'm going to mirror you, Sally, but if you can just remember to do one. So there's a trigger. I'm experiencing a large emotion. Breathe. Or observing or naming it to tame it. In there, a really wonderful practice is also to begin to consider the other person. So really beginning to develop empathy and to begin to see it from a different perspective. In that, thinking through the consequences. Now, most of the time as humans, we don't. Yeah. But if we can do just one part of this, it then allows us to move into that response. So not only have we identified what's happening, we've begun to name it, we've then also begun to regulate it. And that way we've not only lessened it, but we're also going to have favourable outcomes and the situation's going to be different. I was saying to someone the other day when I was presenting at a school that there is this sort of wanting to, or this, we've taught it, therefore we should remember it. I think a really critical part of, the work that we're doing here with our young people, even with ourselves, is also remembering that this is like any skill. We need to practice it consistently. So the same way we would be practicing our numeracy or literacy, we need to be practicing our emotional literacy. We need to be consistently doing this regularly on a daily basis, modelling it and bringing this into all of our practices, not just as students, but also for us. So just a few ways that we can begin to develop self-regulation in the classroom. Again, as I just mentioned, really being able to practice what we're preaching in a way, developing also a way of having a time in your day that you are beginning to settle down, that you are beginning to name it. And you'll see the bottom point here, connecting with your students. When we are able to also provide that support, sometimes if we do have a student that is a little bit dysregulated, making sure that we've taken the time to regulate ourselves before we try and support and regulate or help and support another student. And there's a lot of research in that too, that our young people also, we co-regulate our emotions with them. So if I'm escalated and I'm going in and I'm trying to de-escalate a situation, it's not going to go very well. So again, we come back to our own well-being being really, really critical. Sally, did you want to add anything to this part?
Yes, I'll just throw in one bit of science to the last point. So Dr. Professor Mark Brackett, who you know I adore, he's at the Harvard School of Emotional Intelligence. He says that, this is the most important part of teaching emotional intelligence, because research shows us that the best way to engage students is to develop relationships. We would all agree here. But the currency of relationships is emotional expression.
And I think that's so incredibly important for us to remember. So from tonight, again, we're just giving you an example of on a whole school approach around languaging for self-regulation. The one that we use is our brain is connected to our body in many different ways. When we feel a certain emotion, we may also have thoughts, feelings, actions, and sensations in our body that let us know let us know how our brain is feeling. These are like warning signs, and noticing them can help to understand our emotional state and do something to manage our feelings and behavior. And again, we can constantly keep speaking back to that. So it's like the ability to be able to scaffold that out too. So in regards to tonight and in regards to support for what we do, we also have an offer tonight for Life Skills Go. And I'll just give you a really brief overview of what Life Skills Go is. So Life Skills Go is our online interactive blended learning platform that not only delivers explicit learning in terms of content of videos, lessons, workbook, but a really large analytics and data measurement tool. So one of the things that we recognised right back at the beginning that we were talking to you about is how can we best support educators, be aligned to curriculum, provide evidence-based programs that can really be a supportive tool to not only a classroom, to a grade or to a group of student classes, but also to a whole school so we have visibility. And within that, the online blended learning platform is broken down into lots of different areas. So it's got a huge amount of content within that. All of what we offer is also can be delivered on an interactive whiteboard. It can be offered on individual devices. It can be run in small groups or across a whole school or a whole class. To get students on, we've made it really, really easy by either using QR codes or logins, and particularly for our younger years from foundation or kindergarten to 2, there's accompanying workbooks for that as well. Just a basic little look into what's in there. So you've heard us talk a lot about the weather report unit. We start off with the weather report roll call. Within that, it's allowing the students, all of the emotions are age-based and they grow with the students. There's a quick weather report activity that allows students to be able to register how they're feeling, and a pre-activated response to begin to move them into being ready for learning is activated there, and it will ask them after how they're feeling. So all of this data is recorded for each of the students. There's online digital lessons that again are stage-based and age-based. And also from our physical programs, we also back that up with resources that you can begin to take offline and into your classroom. And they're all aligned to the PDH-PDE as well as the Australian general capabilities as well. Oopsie daisy. I suppose one of the areas that we get asked a lot about too is our reporting. So in regards to, there's one thing about data, but we also want to make sure, as we've been saying, that it's really, really accurate. We have what we call our weather report unit where we start schools off, which is really laying that foundation for identification of emotions, regulation, also beginning to an area that Sally and I were like, can we get to it tonight? And it was like around attention training. But in regards to a comment that Jess made earlier in the webinar, which was, I have up to 30 students in front of me, how do I know how they are? So each time the roll call happens, it will also adjust and track for the emotional states that your students are in as they are in the classroom. And at a click of a glance in real time, you're actually able to see that report and that graph there. There are tools so that you don't have to go looking outside to how you can begin to get them ready for learning. Also, your individual reporting of understanding of the concepts are there. From a whole school approach for wellbeing officers or for executive teams or for principals, you also have at a glance what was taught, when it was taught, and pulling down those scope and sequences as well. Just a really kind of a little deep dive into, or just a little snippet into what it looks like. So we've just pulled up a week 8 program here. So this is of the weather report unit, and this is the week 8. All of the resources are also, you have your big ideas, your success criteria. You also have beautiful resources so that you're all speaking the same language, but you've got resources also for your classroom and also for your, just forgot the name of where we drink coffee. Oh, Sally, help me out here. Staff room, I don't know, definitely getting late. Can you tell I got up very, very early this morning? But you also have your emotion cards, all your printable resources, so you've got those visibility, but also having a look at what we're teaching. Within that, you'll have your digital lesson. So this lesson for week 8 was managing emotions. You'll have the emotions that you're teaching, and you'll also have your posters and your physical resources as well. It's all laid out in a very, very simple plan. And what we do as well is we pride ourselves on really making sure that we onboard your staff and making sure that everyone feels really, really comfortable with what they're delivering. We love partnering with schools, and we're constantly developing our software to make sure that, and I often joke but don't joke, that we're an education company that's built technology, not a technology company that's come into education. So I think it's really important that we have those relationships with our schools to really be able to help and support you. Within that, what we are going to do is we are offering this evening a free 30-day access, whether you wanted your whole school to do 30 days or whether you want to have a few teachers or maybe grades or your executive team. So what we will be doing is we will be posting up in just a second. One of the things that we would love to hear from you is just a survey on what we're offering, how we can continue. Oh, thank you, Audra. So Audra's just popped it in the chat box right now. We do offer a huge amount of things. So we have our teachers' professional learning. We have lots of webinars that, for those of you that have attended with us before, we also have teachers' wellbeing that we can run in the schools. But we have this opportunity, if you'd like to get started or to even begin to have a meeting with us to look at how we can support you with your wellbeing rollout or how you're working. So we'd love you to jump on. It's valuable for us to get feedback around what we're offering. And I just want to say a huge big thank you. The most important thing too is don't forget that your wellbeing is critical to the wellbeing of the students. It's so easy when we're in those teaching professions or caring professions that we're making everyone else really, really important. The number one thing is too, making sure that you're okay and making sure that you put that care and wellbeing into yourself as well. And I want to say a huge big thank you to Sally, who is forever tirelessly sharing, studying, working, writing, educating, supporting, doing all the incredible things, not only with Life Skills Group, but also as a friend and an educator with me. And I just want to say thank you so much for jumping on so late at night. And to the huge number of educators that we've had online this evening, I think I've just been absolutely feel incredibly blessed and grateful to be surrounded by such an incredible support of people. So Sally, I just want to say thank you. I'm just going to pass it back over to you for a second.
Well, thank you so much. It's always an absolute honour to work with you and Life Skills, because we are making such a difference in the lives of so many students. And we couldn't do that. We could have an amazing platform, but we couldn't make the impact that we have without the teachers. So Nikki knows we're both passionate about teaching wellbeing to you, because we need you to help support the leaders of the next generation, you know, the future leaders. So thank you so much for joining us on a Wednesday evening, and thank you always, Nikki.
Thanks, Sally. Oh, thank you. So I love reading the comments in there. And if we didn't get to anyone, thanks, Lisa. And also a huge big thank you to Lisa and to Jess for jumping in. Thank you, Megan. That's really lovely to hear. That was a fantastic, and it was valuable and important. I think that's something that Sally and I and the whole organisation realise. I think Lisa mentioned it earlier. Everyone's so busy that we really want to make sure that we are supporting you, educating you, and going back to where we started early on in the session of how can we support you and how can we share knowledge so that we can support you in your role. So the link for the Survey Monkey's there. If you do want to sign up for your first 30 days for free, or if you'd like to book in for a session with one of our wellbeing consultants, please do. Just pop your details down and we'll follow up on that. Or if you'd like us to introduce what we're doing, or if tonight you've gone, wow, I'd really like to do that, but I'd like to find out more, we are running a demonstration. So Sally and I had this little bit of a, do we deep dive into the weather report unit and do a demonstration? But tonight was really around, hopefully, giving some support and some education around identifying emotions and self-regulation this evening. On Monday, what we will be doing is a demonstration of the Life Skills Group platform and Life Skills Go platform, and looking at that weather report unit. So if you did want to take it back and bring some fellow educators or bring your staff along, or if you'd like us to demonstrate to your whole school, please pop that down on the survey. So we'd be more than happy to run a free demonstration. Again, as I said, we make sure and pride ourselves on our onboarding and support. So making sure that if you do bring in a tool, that tool will be used, valued, and understood how to be there. I'd also like to say a huge big thank you to Anna and Audra, who've been in the background supporting everyone on chat, because it's a lot, and particularly when we have large numbers there, it's really, I just want to say a huge big thank you, and to our engineering team that are constantly supporting Sally and myself. Wish you a really, really beautiful evening, and thank you so much for joining us.